Thank you all. Thank you, Dr. Atta, for giving me the opportunity to be a resource person in this FDP. Before starting the talk, I would say that Dr. Atta gave me a tough job of starting the whole FDP. Starting a synthetic chemist who knows almost nothing about chemical engineering and designing of sensors. So what I would basically try to do through my deliberation in this 1.5 hour is to take everyone through a journey where we can design molecules at our will and the way we choose, and then we can kind of use those molecules, some of the recent uses of those molecules as a sensors. So let me start by sharing my presentation. So I'll switch off the video so that I can. Okay, I think it is visible to everyone.
Yes, sir, it is visible, sir.
Okay. So the topic of my today's deliberation is designing supramolecular coordination complexes for their potential application as sensors. So to start with, okay, so to start with, I'll start with an example or what is called as an analogy. So just let us think of sensors in our modern life. Okay, all of us at some point of time must have boarded an aeroplane, or we know a lot about aeroplanes. Just think of an aeroplane which is basically full of hundreds, thousands of sensors. So what it basically does is that it is those sensors that kind of detects the position, height, speed, temperature inside the cabin, outside the atmosphere, location, everything, and all these data get fed into a huge or a large computer, high capacity computer, which then gives an output which results in like operation of that flight in terms of its flaps, its wings, and all those things. And a failure of even a small a sensor in an aeroplane may lead to like tragic accidents. So sensors have become an integral part in our life, and there are like sensors everywhere, starting from our home to office to the environment. Everywhere sensors which help us in measuring various data and making our life easier, making our life safer. Okay, so think of it. There are a whole lot of sensors. I have no idea how these sensors are designed, these circuits are designed, but I'm just trying to kind of relate to what my field wants to do is like a temperature sensor. This temperature is primarily used in ovens and in other places where we sense the temperature. Then proximity sensors, which are basically, take the laser pointer. So we have proximity sensor, which basically is used in like car parking, where you can, when you reverse back the cars, it gives you signals so that you don't crash onto something. So these proximity sensors are used in doors. Then there are infrared sensors. Like infrared sensor is something which is used only other day I kind of learned it that these days many of these vehicles, they have rain sensing wipers. So how does this rain sensing wipers work? They basically work on these infrared sensors where infrared radiation is shot onto the glass, and then it reflects back into a certain angle. Now, if there is water on the shield, then the light is, all of that light doesn't travel, so it activates the wiper. Okay? So this kind of sensor, infrared sensors, motion sensors, all are being used. Ultrasound sensors, which can detect very low sounds. Then smoke and gas sensor, which is very common in homes, households, which kind of helps us or protects us from fire and any other such incidents. There's something called alcohol sensor. Now, this is widely used in Western countries. In our country, it is not that frequently used. But in Western countries, if you drive at a high speed, and particularly at night, the first thing you need to give is a breathalyzer test. Convicted under DI, DUI, which basically is driving under influence. So it is basically a sensor which helps in detecting the content of alcohol in someone's breath. Then the touch sensors, we have those in our laptops, mobiles, everywhere we have touch sensors. We have humidity. So there are a whole lot of sensing to be used. Now, what relates to my talk or my field or as a chemist is chemical sensors. The sensors I just talked about are basically circuit based or certain material based. And like some of them are optical sensors, some of them are magnetic, capacitive, those kind of sensors. But what I'm interested or what is related to my area of interest is what is chemical sensors. Now, chemical sensors are basically small devices that basically convert a chemical information into a measurable signal or measurable information in terms of whether it is concentration, activity, partial pressure, whatever. It basically relays that thing to the relays that thing, and we measure the thing. So basically, a chemical sensor comprises of two parts. First part is recognition part, and then there is transduction part. So that basically makes a chemosensor. Recognition part is one which is the molecule. Say, for example, so only this particular would be recognized here, while others will not be recognized. So this is like selective recognition. So once it binds, a signal is transmitted, which is through the transduction. Now that signal could be fluorescence, that signal could be optical, that signal could be like change in the pH, and all those kind of change in the structure, and those could be detected, and that's what a chemical sensor basically does. So to understand a chemical sensor, it consists of two parts, recognition and a transduction part. Now, where from we get all this inspiration though? So just to give you a background, the inspiration for all this sensing is from nature actually. So all this molecular recognition, where a particular chemical or particular sensor recognizes a molecule in terms of chemosensing, it comes from nature. Now nature, through its own intricate ways, have constructed big biomolecules, large molecules, using various kind of interaction, covalent as well as non-covalent interaction. And made big biomolecules, and each of those biomolecules have very specific purpose to recognize certain molecules, certain gases, certain small molecules, big molecules, all those basically binds to an active site and gives rise to kind of a very specific molecular recognition. So like in a DNA, it basically DNA helices basically are constructed because those purine and pyrimidine bases recognize each other and then form hydrogen bonds, and thus basically that's the essence of life. You can see like in lipid bilayers, there are permeation of water molecules, which also basically goes through this particular, what you call as molecular recognition. So just to give one more example, it's like, this is a very basic, like a high school or high secondary example. This is a structure of hemoglobin. I being an inorganic chemist, I always like to show whenever I get a chance of hemoglobin, which is basically the makes us survive on this planet by inhaling oxygen and doing all the metabolic process. So it is basically a tetramer, right? So it has 4 porphyrin units. Now, what happens is that when this deoxygenated porphyrin active site binds an oxygen, there is a movement of this iron, and it basically results in a kind of, it sends a signal to other subunits that that oxygen should be bound, or one oxygen is bound, and that is what we often call as cooperativity effect. Now, that is basically a signal. So how I want to relate is that, so if this particular site is the recognition center, then once it binds, that signal that transmit is the transducer. So it is through this globin that signal gets transduced and successive binding happens. Single example, like whole array of protein biomolecules, which kind of recognize molecules or sense molecules in a biological system. Now, we learn from nature, and from there, kind of designing of molecules, big molecule scale. So in early supramolecules, because the title of my topic itself is supramolecular coordination complexes, so our early supramolecules, by mimicking the nature, used non-covalent interactions, and thereby showing encapsulation of molecular recognition properties. Like this one is 18 crown 6. It can very easily bind alkali metals like potassium, sodium selectively. Now, this is what was first discovered in 1960s by Pedersen. And then this is cryptand, which is a little bit of higher complexity, cryptands, which is discovered by Len. And then this is spherans, discovered by Cram. And you all know those 3 people eventually got Nobel Prize in 1987 because of discovery of the field of supramolecules. So these supramolecules basically uses a whole lot of interactions, and all these interaction, like ion-ion interaction, then ion dipole, dipole-dipole, hydrogen bonding interaction, cation pi, pi, van der Waals, hydrophobic, all these interactions are used. And we kind of group all of those in terms of non-covalent interaction. Now, the other kind of interaction is metal ligand, which is neither too weak nor too strong. So it is this metal ligand interaction that is widely used in construction of supramolecular coordination complexes. Now, we'll talk about this as we go on. One of the things we need to kind of keep in mind is that some of these weaker interactions like hydrogen bond, cation pi, pi pi, van der Waals, even dipoles, dipole, these interactions are often difficult to control. It is almost impossible to control these interactions. Although nature has mastered and learned to control these interactions, we humans are yet to control these non-covalent interactions. That's why often you cannot rationally design a molecule using these particular non-covalent interactions. But the advantage we have with the metal ligand interaction is that metal ligand interaction is directional. So it is a direction. So we have a control over how we want to shape, over the shape and size of our supramolecules. So that's why metal ligand bonds are much more convenient in designing what we call as supramolecular coordination complexes. So just to kind of get into the background of all these things. So the supramolecular assembly, where it kind of assembles together different, we call them tectons or synthons, where one has the complementarity to the other, can combine, and that is what is called a self-assembly, where different parts reorganize themselves and combine to give a final molecule, which is a much different property than the individual tectons. And the product, basically what that leads to is a thermodynamically stable product. Now, the supramolecular self-assembly, basically, if we think of it based on the nature of interaction, we can classify them into three classes, basically. First one is where it uses hydrogen bonding, and nature uses it extensively in kind of assembling even the very essence of life, which is DNA. Then protein would lose their specificity and their function if all those hydrogen bondings are broken. In fact, that is what happens when you boil an egg, right? So the albumin basically denatures because of the heating. It breaks those bonds, and then it becomes an irreversible process. The second class would be where it uses non-covalent interactions. Now, non-covalent interactions is like where we make molecules where there are like say pi-pi interactions, which can assemble molecules together and form a big form a big supramolecule, or something like these van der Waals interactions. The third category is where we use directional metal ligand bonds, and this what it gives rise to what is called as supramolecular coordination complexes. And as I said, this hydrogen controlling hydrogen bonding and these are often difficult, although we can control the pi-pi stacking, cation pi to a large extent by rationally designing how the molecule can interact, but still we cannot control the dimension of the molecule. But whereas when you use metal ligand bond, we can control the dimension of the molecule as well. So what are these supramolecular coordination complexes? So just to kind of give you an idea vis-a-vis these these metal organic frameworks, because people are much aware about metal organic frameworks, but supramolecular coordination complexes is not that, people are not that much aware about it. So just to give you an idea in relation to how supramolecular complexes could be defined, is that say if I take this pedal wheel SBU, which is secondary building unit. So this is a very common common motif shown by like copper acetate and many other transition metal complexes. These are acetates, 4 acetates. So if I have all these positions open, then basically what it would give me is a 3-dimensional MOF with any other ligand, any linear ligand or any ligand, whatever I use, it would give rise to a 3D MOF. Now, if I block these 2 positions, please note that if I am blocking these 2 positions, so these 4 are basically perpendicular to each other. So it will lead to a 2-dimensional MOF or 2-dimensional network. Now, if I block these 2 again, from these to this, I block other 2 and only leave these 2 which are diagonally opposite to each other, then I should get a 1-dimensional MOF. Now, if I, rather than keeping these 2 open, which are diagonally opposite, if I keep these 2 open where there is a subtended angle of 90 degree, that is, if I encode a directionality into it, then I would end up getting discrete supramolecular coordination complexes. So basically, to design a supramolecular coordination complexes, which we will discuss, is that you need to, while designing a ligand, while designing an acceptor or a donor, you basically need to kind of encode an angle, a directionality into your acceptor and or your donor, so that they can basically kind of combine and give you a discrete molecule. Whereas if you do not encode the angularity, if you leave it open, then it becomes infinite networks. So these MOFs are infinite networks, and these are like finite discrete molecules. So what are these supramolecular complexes then? So what I do is that in the first part, I'll talk about the design, how we can design these supramolecular complexes. There are various strategies with which we can design. And then in the second part, I'll show you some of the very recent examples, how these supramolecular coordination complexes, SCCs, has been used as a in sensing, as a sensing material. Okay, so as I mentioned, these complexes are discrete. That is, they are isolated single molecules, a big construct. Now, this could be constructed by mixing different tectons like these or these, and using the metal ligand bond as the impetus, and we can generate a single thermodynamically favored product. So for example, if we want to design a square, for example, a molecule which is in square shape, so what you can do is that we can take a, for example, we can take a donor which is a 90 degree angularity encoded in it, and an acceptor which is linear, and then through a series of process of assembly where it could bind successively, and then whenever there is an incorrect orientation, it will again disassemble, and then eventually it gives rise to a thermodynamically stable product, which thermodynamically stable product through combination of these tectons. So if you want to design a square, you need like 4 of these donor with 4 of these acceptors, and you get to a thermodynamic product. Now, if in such cases, if in the synthesis of these, if one of the primary condition is that both the donor, the acceptor, and whatever the assembly is formed should remain in the solution for this, for whole of the process to be complete. Otherwise, if either this or one of these incomplete fragment precipitates at some stage, then the self-correction cannot occur because the stoichiometry is lost, and as such, the yield would be less, or you may not at all get the thermodynamically stable product. So that can be controlled by carefully selecting the reaction conditions, either through solvent or like changing the pH and all those things. You can always control the reaction condition to get to a thermodynamically stable product. So why do we need, or why these supramolecular complexes, and like what are its advantages vis-a-vis like molecular organic metal organic frameworks or other polymers? So these are interesting for the sensor, because in these, as I said, we have two part where there is a donor and an acceptor, and we are using the metal ligand directional coordination bond as the glue to join those fragments, exactly like a Lego. I think many of you have played with the Lego, where you can join different parts and construct different shapes out of it. So here we have an ability to call the functional groups, whatever we insert, and it is this functional group that can impart it, like or give it sensing ability. We can precisely design a structure the way we want by rationally designing the acceptor or a donor, and then we can get a molecule of our desire. And by doing so, what happens is that we can also incorporate other functional groups which can help us in non-covalent interaction, or we can give rise to say hydrogen bonding or pi-pi interaction within the cavity of these supramolecules or of these SCCs. And then we can do selective encapsulation. The synthetic it is very easy to synthesize these donors and acceptors. If you are good at organic synthesis, then it's a very easy job. And the other thing I would like to mention is this building block versatility. Like you can use whole lot of building blocks. Like you can have a huge library of building blocks, which can basically could be used to design these SCCs. So how to design? Now, there are different design strategies that have been developed over the years, and some of those are like directional bonding approach, primarily due to Professor Stang, with whom I have the fortune to work almost 3 years. And then there is symmetry interaction approach, which is basically developed by Professor Ken Raymond in Caltech. Then there is molecular paneling approach, which is basically developed by Fujita's group in Japan. Weakling method, which is basically developed by Chad Mirkin in US, and then dimetallic building block approach, which is basically pioneered by Professor F.A. Cotton. So these are some of the design strategies for supramolecular coordination complexes. Please keep in mind that these designs. Okay, probably someone's mic is on. So these design strategies, please note that all of these uses metal ligand bond as as an interaction method, and through these a whole library of molecules of different shapes and sizes have been developed. I'll try to show some of those, and then we'll go into the other application part. So before going into this, I'll like to take you through an history of how this field developed. So as you can see, in 1960s, Pedersen discovered crown ethers, and then in 1969, Len kind of came out with the scriptants, and it showed its binding properties. And then another like 5 years after, Cran came up with spherants. And as I said, there is increasing complexity going from Pedersen to Cran. And then all of them together were awarded Nobel Prize for their work on supramolecular self-assembly in 1987. Now, what is interesting is that immediately after 1987, these different design strategies started to develop. So one of the first one is the reported by Fujita. After 3 years, reported what is called as molecular square. So where it has been, and through a donor acceptor, so using a donor and an acceptor, designed a molecular square. Then immediately, like within 5 years, Professor Stang developed the directional bonding approach. Then came Raymond's, after 2 years, symmetry interaction approach. Then came Chad Mirkin's Wickling approach, another 2 years. And then in 2001, it's Cotton's diametric building block approach. So they're like, these are the design strategies I'll be discussing. And culmination of all of this ended up giving a Nobel Prize in 2016 to Pascal Sauvage, Joe Fraser Stoddard, and Ben Feringa for designing molecular machines. Although molecular machine is not a part of discussion today, but that is a whole lot of interesting field where this coordination driven or this supramolecular coordination complexes has been used to design molecular machines. Okay, so first let us talk about directional bonding approach. Okay, the one developed by Professor Stang in University of Utah. So what does this basically do is that through a directional bonding, because of the metal ligand approach, if we can design acceptors having various angularity encoded in them, and if we can design various donors with specific angles, and if we combine them, we should get metal cycles, 2D polygons of various shapes. So for example, if we have a 0 degree, means the angle subtended is 0. So if these two are combined, so we are supposed to get a square like this. So if a 90-degree acceptor is combined with a 90-degree donor, it should give a square that is 2 plus 2 square. Again, same 90-degree acceptor combined with 180-degree donor should give rise to a 4 plus 4 square. Similarly, if we combine a 60-degree acceptor with a 120-degree donor, it should give a rhombus shaped molecule. If we are to design a triangle, we can take a 60-degree acceptor and a linear donor, and then it should give rise to a 3 plus 3 triangle. We can go higher design of these. So if we take a 109-degree acceptor and a linear donor, we should get a pentagon. with 120-degree acceptor and 120-degree donor, we should get a 3+3 hexagon, a smaller one. Whereas if we take this 120-degree acceptor and 180-degree donor, we should get a larger 6x6, 6+6 hexagon. So all these could be designed as per which we can design a molecular rectangle. If we take this 0 degree with a 180 degree and vice versa. So this is how we can design 2D polygons. I'll show you specific examples of how these are designed. The other way is designing polyhedras, the 3D cages. So here you need, rather than a ditopic like one which has two binding sides, the acceptors which has two binding sides, or the donor which has two accepting, a donor which has two donor sides, the acceptor which has two acceptor sides. Here you need to combine a ditopic subunit where you have like two acceptor or donor sides, and tritopic subunit where you have three acceptor or donor sides. And if you combine them, like if you have something around 90 degree, if you combine with a tritopic subunit, you get a trigonal bipyramid. If you combine this with this, you can also get a double square. And then if you combine these with a 120-degree planar tritopic subunit, you get a truncated tetrahedron. You can design an adamantoid shaped molecule with 109 ditopic subunit with a 109-degree tritopic subunit where you get an adamantoid. If you take 109-degree ditopic subunit with 120-degree planar tritopic unit, you get a cuboctahedron, a huge molecule of large complexity. You can design a tetrahedron, you can design a cube, you can design a dodecahedron. So these are basically through this method, you can design like a whole lot of Archimedean and Platonic solids. There are other polygonal structures also design using this, where like the angle subtended is changed and it results to various other molecules or various other supramolecules, SSEs. The second method of designing supramolecule is one which is developed by Ken Raymond, and it is symmetry interaction method. So here basically what is done is that a coordination vector is considered along the metal ligand bond. So if this is the metal ligand bond, so this would be a coordination vector. So think of it, if this is a tristellated complex, then it would be like each of these metal ligand chelate complex is considered to be a vector in this direction. So these three vectors as per this, so this is called as a chelate plane, and these are the coordination vectors, and ligand approach at a particular angle. So what happens is that if you carefully design a ligand which can approach at a particular angle, then you can form chelate at these positions where these two are metals, and you can form a tristellate complex here and a tristellate moiety here. So two tristellate moieties bound together by a ligand. So for example, this ligand, where it basically forms a tristellate at this position, three of those molecules forms a tristellate moiety here and another tristellate moiety here, and overall the molecule has a C3 axis of rotation, so it is like an helix. You can design tetrahedrons where you have these molecules bound in this direction, and here three of those again would form a tristellate moiety at these four corners of a tetrahedron. You can use this tritopic ones to design M4L4 tetrahedrons. If you use this ditopic, you get a M4L6 tetrahedron. So by rationally designing a ligand a donor ligand, which can basically form a tristylet complexes. You can design molecules such as these helices or triangles or these tetrahedrons through this method. So this is what is called a symmetry interaction method. I hope it is clear. So the third method is what is called as molecular paneling approach. Now this approach is basically was due to Fujita's group from Japan. So here in this, basically what happens is that you take panels and then those panels acts as donor subunits, and you take metal nodes, and these metal nodes basically combine this panel to make different architectures. It's like using panel boards to construct a house. So if you take 4 of those and clip them at the corners of a tetrahedron with a metal node, then you basically get what is called a tetrahedron. Now, if you take 8 of these panel boards, these triangular panel boards, and combine them using 6 metal nodes, then you get an octahedron. Okay, so how this panel board could be? Such a panel board, an example would be like this. Okay, so trispyridine, this triazole. So it can form a Ml6L4 truncated tetrahedron where you have 1, 2, 3, and 4 panel boards forming a truncated tetrahedron of M6L4. If you change the position of your donor site, here the donor site are at the corners of the triangle. Now, if you change the position of the donor site like this, then you can design others like a M6L4 square pyramidal cone, which is like a cup where you can put in molecules, and it has been extensively studied by Fujita's group, where they have used this particular architecture and this particular architecture to encapsulate a whole lot of molecules, do enantioselective reaction, do selective encapsulations, bind proteins, and whole lot of works. There's a whole volume of work that has been done by Fujita's group using these and these two particular architectures. Now, if in this, here also the direction is different. So what happens is that the panel board would be like this. This arrow should have been here. So you can form a trigonal prism, which is where you need 6 metal nodes and 3 of those panel boards to make a trigonal prism. Here's a real life example that has been synthesized with porphyrins. Now, if the position is here also, again, the position is at the corners of this square board. So this panel board, if you combine, then 6 of those panel boards would be required, along with 12 of the metal nodes, to make this hexagonal prism. And this is a molecule which we have synthesized in P.S. Mukherjee's group while I was in IISc Bangalore. It is a nice molecule having these panel boards, and these positions could bind or sense zinc actually, or any other metal. It can sense this. These positions can bind 6 transition metals into its cavity, and this inside cavity is extensively large. If I remember correctly, the dimension of this is almost about 27 angstrom, which is like quite big in terms of molecular cavity. So in this particular design strategy, you design a panel and you strategically position your donor sites, and then you combine with a metal node which can clip those panels together, and you can basically design a molecule of your choice. So just by changing the position of the donor, you can end up getting different architectures or different architecture. So it is only thing one needs to do is to rationally design these panel boards and then clip it with metal such as palladium, platinum, whatever, which is 90 degree, and you just clip them and you get to a very nice architecture. The fourth approach is what is called as weakling approach, and this is basically developed by Chad Mirkin. So here what happens is that here the supramolecular coordination complex, through using a hemilabile ligand actually, it can expand. It can have a condensed structure which is a kinetic product, and then an open structure which is thermodynamic product. So to design this, you need obviously a metal center, and then a ligand can be designed with a spacer where the spacer could be anything. You can introduce a fluorescence spacer, you can introduce a space, a fragment which can sense certain molecules, and with these hemilabile arms, so if it binds to a monomeric product, which is thermodynamic product, then what happens is that it can bind like this. But if two of those binds, which leads to a condensed structure binding here, so normally this is an oxygen or nitrogen, depending on what metal you use, and it could be phosphorus or oxygen. And then once you add some ligand, what happens is that this particular bond breaks and the structure opens up. So this type of supramolecular architectures have been extensively used in catalysis, even in sensing, various kinds of sensing, where this shape change, the advantage of this shape change has been taken to study its potential applications. The fourth one is the fifth one, and the last one is called as dimetallic building block approach. So this is basically where you take a dimetallic building block, and again you block one side, these two, and leave 1, 2, 3, 4 binding sides open. Okay, so and then if you combine it with a linear donor, you get to a square, you can get to a triangle, depending on what kind of ligand you are using, and you can design different molecules using this particular method. So now let us go and see how exactly the examples that have been for the two-dimensional SCCs like the metallocycles. As I mentioned, if you combine this 180-degree metal acceptor with a 60-degree donor, you can make a 3+3 triangle, okay, something like this. So here you see, this is the 60-degree, this particular terpyridine ligand which has been designed has 60-degree angle at this position, right? If you take, so it has a 60-degree angle, and here the linear is basically a metal node. So when you combine, you get a nice triangle. Okay. Now, other way around, if you take a metal which has a 60-degree angle, a metal acceptor, and your donor is a linear one, you will still get a 3 plus 3 triangle, but it should have a different shape. So a different arrangement of its linkers. So for example, think of it, this particular acceptor has a 60-degree angle subtended or encoded in it, whereas these two are these are nitrates, which are labile. So when you combine with a substituted 4,4-dash bipyridines, you can include anything here, any molecule. Only thing is that you need these two to be at 180 degree to each other, a linear one. So you can basically make a triangle. So here are some of the triangles that we have made in IISc Bangalore, like where we have used this other having a heteroatom. Even then it will still form a slightly distorted triangle. We can design with 2 nitrogens here, but as I said, it will bind only 1 nitrogen, other would remain because of the steric hindrance. Other one could not be bound, so it basically gives rise to triangles, nice triangles. You can design more complex triangle. This is designed by Professor Smeitel in Germany, where they have used this phenanthrene moieties to first design this through a Sonova-Sierra coupling, this part, and then you add this part where this could be a copper or a silver, and you end up making a molecule which is highly fluorescent. If you use this metal as a zinc, then this particular triangle is a highly fluorescent one. So one can design these complex ones. This is the ones designed using FA Cotton's dimetallic building block. The one I was talking about, this is the dimetallic building block, and these are the these are the donors. So here it is a terephthalic acid, and these are basically rheniums. Here you can change these ligands, but even nevertheless, the structure remains nice triangle. Now, if you want to design a square, you can take a 90-degree acceptor and a linear donor, and then this is a 90-degree acceptor. The angle between these two nitrates is 90 degree. So if you use it, you get to a square. This is the first square that was reported by Fujita's group using this particular approach, this complementary donor-acceptor approach. You can do it other way around, where you change now your linear part, the linear tecton is an acceptor, and your 90-degree donor is your donor is 90 degree, then you would get the other way around. This is what Professor Stang first reported in 95. You can use this this heteroleptic ligand, where it will give rise to a equilibrium of square and triangles, and eventually in solid state it gives rise to molecular square, nice molecular squares using this ferrocin based acceptor. So nice looking squares. You can design a pentagon like using this carbazole based ligand with a terpyridine binding sites, and use a iron, and then it would basically bind it like this. So it forms what is called as a pentagon. Now, if we design a 120 degree donor with a 180 degree acceptor, we can make a hexagon, 6 plus 6 hexagon. these are some of the examples of hexagons. This is where the symmetry interaction approach was used to synthesize this nice hexagon. Here also using this approach, these hexagons were made. These are molecular hexagons, all of these. We can design design molecular rectangles. Like if you take this clip, this 0 degree with this linear ligand, so you basically end up making a rectangle. Okay, a rectangle which looks like this, molecular rectangle. So there are a whole lot of other 2D things, but I have just kind of shown only some of those which could be of interest. And there you can always design your architecture if you can rationally design a ligand. In 3 dimension, this is if you want to design a tetrahedron, as I said, if you design cleverly a ligand which can form tristellate moieties at these corners, then you can get a tetrahedron. This is an example which is basically from the Ken Raymond's group. This is an example from Nitschke's group from Oxford. So here they use like a 3-component assembly where these two basically forms an imine bond in situ, and again this tristellate mechanism through this symmetry interaction approach, it forms a tetrahedron. Here also it is same. This M4L6, you have 6 ligands here, where this specifically this 5-member NN chelates basically binds, and these tristellates are formed at these corners of the tetrahedron to give these molecules. This is an example from Ward's group, Michael Ward's group. If you want to design a truncated tetrahedron, take a planar tritopic ligand and a 90-degree acceptor. You clip them at the corners and you get what is called a truncated tetrahedron or M6L4 tetrahedron. So this is the similar panel, and if you use the metal clip, you get one here, one panel at the back, one panel at the start, and these two. So it is again a truncated tetrahedron. You can use any kind of clip at the corners, molecular, the acceptor clips, it could be anyone. You can use ruthenium, you can use palladium, platinum, and it should give rise to similar kind of cages. And as I said, these cages have been extensively used to study various reactive intermediates, catalysis, encapsulation, all molecular recognition. Everything has been studied using this particular architecture. Now, if you want to make a cube, well, how do we make it? Take a tritopic acceptor with a metal where you have 90-degree and a linear donor, and you just combine them, and it will give you rise to ML8 L12 cube. So here you see this is a ruthenium based where you have 1, 2, 3. These 3 are labile ligands. So these 3 positions are blocked. So these are closed or capped, and these 3 are open. So this particular fragment can bind 3 donors, these linear donors, these phosphorus bipyridine, and it can give rise to a cube, a molecular cube. You can make it in other way around, where you take a tetratopic donor, a tetratopic acceptor with a 90-degree donor, where this is like a 90-degree donor, and you combine with this palladium nitrate, and it basically forms a cube like this. You want to make the other way around, where you want now this tetratopic donor and a 90-degree acceptor. You just you design a molecule like this, where this is the tetratopic, this blue one, and this, you clip it and you make a cube like this. So basically it depends on how you design the ligand, one of the acceptor, how you design your acceptor and how you design your donor, and then you combine and then you get your desired architecture. So this is what I've shown. This is an octahedron actually, where you have this panel, particular panel. So 8 of those basically forms this octahedron. Similar is an example of another octahedron. Going on to the larger ones like dodecahedron. So here how to get a dodecahedron? We basically take a linear acceptor and then a tritopic donor, and this donor can be of different lengths. Like you can change this length, introduce, you can increase or decrease depending on this. We can vary the size of this dodecahedron, and this is an interesting part of the work because these dodecahedrons has a very peculiar similarity with bacteriophages, and this could basically serve as a model for bacteriophages if you can design well. Then we can go to higher ones, higher platonic solid, such as cuboctahedron, where you use a tritopic donor and a 90-degree tritopic acceptor and a 90-degree donor, and you can get to a cuboctahedron. You can design others like double squares, trigonal bipyramids, using different designs, different ligand. You can design a ligand like this, take an adamantine, attach this through Sonogasse-Syrah coupling, and clip it with a metal node, and you get this nice looking trigonal bipyramid. This is an example of double square. This is an example of adamantoid, where you take this and take this. This is 120, and this ligand, if you see, is same as this ligand, but here it is 90, whereas here it is 120. So because of that, you end up getting adamantoid. If you replace this with 90, you will get a double square. So these trigonal prisms, this type of trigonal prism has been extensively studied by Fujita's group, where they can change these pillars, different pillars, increase the length, and then thereby changing the encapsulation of different molecules within it, different molecules, and showing their pi-pi interaction among these molecules. This is another 3-component assembly where heteroleptic method is used, where one is nitrogen, the 2 acceptor binding through a nitrogen and an oxygen, whereas in this system all are homoleptic, where all nitrogens bind to the platinum or palladium center. This is the panel we discussed. This is one we made. This is like with porphyrin basically. It is a trigonal prism. This is the one I discussed. We made it has a very big cavity of around 27.2 angstrom. This one we published way back in 2008 in Engwante. Here is one where you make a molecular nanoball. So you design a molecule like this and then just add palladium, stir it in DMSO, leave it for 2 hours, and then you crystallize and you get a molecular nanoball, which looks like a ball. There are larger nanoballs which have been made by Fujita's group, and they have extensively studied it. So this is like with all these R groups being different, this is fluorescent, This is an amino acid fragment, sugars. This is chlorides. So making the whole cavity hydrophobic. So whole lot of this has been made and synthesized. These are M12, L24 kind of large molecular nanoballs. Fujita's group has synthesized even more larger, which is 24 palladium and 48 ligands. So it is like a huge molecule to the almost to the dimension of like biomolecules. So one can design whatever one wishes based on how you design a molecule. This is 120 degree, and you just put it basically form in DMSO, form this large molecular nanoball. So what I basically want to kind of convey is that you need to think rationally how you can design your acceptor and your donor, and then if you can combine them without like precipitating out, or you can self-assemble them, you would get huge nice structures with huge cavities, nano cavities. These cavities have been used to study various things, various phenomena, even to stabilize various unstable molecules, organometallic fragments. Like if you can take a porphyrin, you can combine like this. Calixarenes could be used to make these cages, nice cages, where you use these metal nodes to basically clip those two calixarene fragments to a nice cage. So this is, I'll stop here for the designing. So I think I've been able to give you an idea about how much we can, how we can design all these molecules. So one of the basic point here is that only thing you need is how you can design your ligands, your acceptor, your tectons, and it will you can design molecule at your wish. Now let us go into its applications, and then I'll finish it. Finish this. So how these supramolecular complexes are useful in sensors? So as I mentioned earlier a while, is that we can control the size and shape of the cavities by designing the ligands, right? And this actually enables us to control the dimension of the molecules, dimension of the binding sites actually, and thereby can adjust to the potential analyte. So it can selectively encapsulate. Then again, after designing, as I've just shown earlier in molecular nanoballs, you can introduce other fragments within or outside these nano cages or metallocycles, so that it can do other kind of non-covalent interactions such as hydrophobic pi and all these, and thereby making your metallocycle more selective towards the target analyte. Also, this molecule in slide is these promolecular coordination sequences normally exhibit what is called a turn-on response, that is fluorescence turn-on. So the fluorescence is enhanced through various mechanisms. One of the primary one is aggregation-induced emission, AIE, and through which it basically the fluorescence gets enhanced. And this is particularly very useful in case of biological setup, where we this enhanced fluorescence activity could help us in understanding various biological imaging actually. The fourth point basically is modularity, which I've already discussed, is that you can make a whole library of ligands, and then from that whole library of ligands, acceptor and donors, you can design, and the same set of like you can design a particular acceptor, and then you can design like 10 donors, and if you use them, you will get molecular ensembles of different sizes and shapes. Now, these are rather synthetically easily accessible. Now, why I'm saying this is that for molecules, large like covalent molecules, covalent supramolecules are often difficult to design. There are molecules have been designed, large organic molecules having large cavities, but often they are difficult to kind of control or rationally design them. So here in this case, because of the directionality of the metal ligand bond, we can easily access the structure we want. Okay, so just to give you an idea, say for example, this is a simple rhomboid.
Sorry for interruption. You have another 5 minutes. Okay. For the last 15 minutes, we keep for question answers.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So I'll finish quickly though. I have like a couple of 5, 6, maybe 6 slides. So we can tune the emission of these metallocycles. Basically, if you look at here, the inner core remains same. It is basically an aniline-based donor. But if you change the substrate on the exterior, the fluorescence, the visible light emission changes and can range from blue to red, almost like blue to red. So it can change. You can change the substituent here, and it can lead to a very wide range of tunable light emission. Like say in this molecule, if you change here is like these technologies, you can design, and this is basically the acceptor, this is basically the donor. So what happens is that it can show a whole range of emissions. So in visible light, these are the ligands, whereas and these are the metallocycles. But in 365, these are the colors of the ligand, whereas these are the fluorescence activity of the metallocycles. And in fact, because of this wide variety of these fluorescence, it has also been even used as an inkjet printing to print different motifs using these particular metallocycles. We can also tune basically using supramolecular oligomers like this supramolecule. You thread it with these, and it basically forms an oligomer, and the combination of these two oligomers like this is blue in blue fluorescence, this shows orange, but combination of them would give rise to a white light emission, which is a much sought after goal. We can have pH sensitive SCCs where you attach a fluorescent moiety here, which is basically a naphthalimide, and then it can basically quantitatively detect protons, and which basically it happens through a proton enhanced electron transfer mechanism. So here it is there. So what happens is that fluorescence gets enhanced. So this is how we can use it as a pH sensor. This is temperature responsive SCC, where this particular SCC is designed, these hexagons at different temperatures show different colors. So this could be designed. You can design this molecule. An anthracene moiety apparently confers this nice property. This is temperature and mechanical force resistive SCCs, where these rhomboids designed using these two stack of anthracenes. It basically, what it does is that it changes color, and if you grind it, that unground is like greenish and the ground is yellow, so it can change color. So it is basically electrochromic. If you treat it with DCM after, then it regains its color. This is stimulus responsive, where you can apply pressure and it is pressure sensitive. So you increase the pressure and its response changes. This is the larger one. You design a molecule, this is an acceptor. So its pressure basically changes with pressure. Its response changes. Its luminescence intensity changes. You can design these rectangular ensembles to detect various metals like copper, nickel, everything, and it basically its fluorescence intensity changes. You can make light emitting SCCs similar to these. This is also white light emitting by using the host gas. So it depends on what gas to include in this particular tetrahedral ensemble designed through symmetry interaction approach. What gas do you have, and it will give rise to different colors. By choosing a particular gas, you can get to white light, get it to emit white light. You can use the same moiety or same molecule to get it sense amino acids. So its color is purple. So when it senses, it becomes green. So its fluorescence can be low, and then fluorescence can be turned up, and like this kind of molecule where it can sense amino acid, biogenic amino acid. You can design a ligand at your wish, and you can make this tetragonal prism which can detect amino acids. These are redox responsive electrochromic device which have been made. So these devices, depending on the redox change, it can change colors. So these metal centers, as and when it's electrochemically its redox changes, it changes in color. Here is another example of a redox responsive electrochromic ensemble. This is one which can sense vapor, organic vapor. So it can sense, once it senses DCM vapor, its color changes, and then it can again regain back its color when it loses that DCM. So this particular chair-shaped molecule could sense DCM. This NIR emissive and ammonia sensing. So you design a ligand, make a metallocycle, and it can sense ammonia, and it emits in the NIR region.
Hello, Dr. Chakraborty, please.
Yeah.
Sir, you have only 2 minutes, please.
Yeah. So for the biological applications like this encapsulation of pharmaceuticals, this dextromethorphan or estradiol, it can encapsulate through these calixarin-based ones. It can sense nitric oxide, which is very important in biological system. So this is a molecular tetrahedron which can sense nitric oxide. In biology, it can sense heparin, through these hexagons. It can basically bind through these, and it can sense heparin. So when heparin, these two are fluorescence inactive, but when heparin binds to these hexagon, it basically shows fluorescence. It can bind dopamine, penicillamine, and bind to its core, and basically selectively encapsulate these enantioselective these chiral molecules. So with this, I finish. So hope I've been able to give a little bit of idea how you can design. So I now hand it over to Dr. Atta.
Thank you, Dr. Chakraborty, for your nice presentation. Actually, Dr. Chakraborty, in first 2 and 3 slides, he has discussed nicely how it depends on the sensors basically. And then he also discussed about the sensor and their utility in the biological aspects. And he has also discussed their mechanism in between the interaction mechanism between the ligands and metallions. So thank you, Dr. Chakraborty, again. Now I request all of the participants, please switch on your video. And if you have any questions, please ask. Please switch on your video, please. Hello. Okay, so please, other requested also switch on their video. And you have any query or any question, please ask. Suprabha is there. Hello. Hello.
Yes, sir.
Please switch on your video. So if you have any question, please ask. So I think they have. Hello. I think that they have no questions regarding your presentation. So thank you, Dr. Chakraborty, again. So
Yeah, thank you.
So I request all participants, please join at I think 1:30. 2:30, sorry, 2:30. Before 2:30, all are requested to join. So in the 2:30, we have lecture on the sensor for detections of the explosive materials, and by Dr. Jasprit Kaur Rajput, NIT Jalandhar. So all are requested to join before 2:30. So thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.